This is Oliver Stringer demonstrating part 1 of the Space Invaders project. So if we hit play here, and actually let me make this bigger, sort of recreated the aspect ratio of the original game. Anyway, you can see that the invaders are coming forward, occasionally shooting, and that their shots are destroying my barriers. I can shoot and destroy the barriers myself, and as I kill more of them, they get faster and faster, and will eventually hit me and die. And I will die. If I get hit by one of their bullets as well, just like I did there and there, I'll also die. And at the very top, you'll see that every time I die, my current score becomes my highest score if it's higher than my old high score, and every time I hit them, my score increases until I die. So I basically have a couple prefabs here. The tank, which is just, simple couple cubes, as well as a transform for the barrel for where the bullets spawn. We have the barrels here. I have one for my bullets and one for the enemy bullets. I have my barriers, which are just made of a bunch of different cubes. And then I have the aliens, and I have one that moves left and one that moves right. So there's a couple different scripts to go through. I'll try to get through them as quick as I can. First, we have the one for controlling the tank. We have the speed we want to be able to move at. We have the game object for the bullet and the transform for the barrel, as well as an instance of the script enemy control, which I'll get to later. Basically, as soon as the tank spawns, because of course when the game is over, when I die, I destroy and respawn a tank, it finds the enemy manager object, which you can see in the hierarchy. I have empty objects to manage the score and manage the enemies. And it gets the enemy control script from them. We can then get the input on the axis, the horizontal axis, to move, and if it's simply between a certain threshold, 20 and negative 20 in this case, we translate it left or right, depending on whether move is positive or negative. And if we detect the space bar down, we instantiate a bullet to the barrel.position, and we just do a quaternion identity because that doesn't matter. It's mainly taking place on a 2D plane, so we don't need to worry much about rotation. And we have two collision events here. We have on trigger enter, which is if the collider trigger, if the collider we're colliding with is tagged as enemy, then we tell the enemy control script that we are dead and we destroy ourselves. If the collision is, if we are colliding with a bullet, which would be an enemy's bullet, which is tagged bullet, then we tell this control script we are dead and we destroy ourselves. In the shock control, which is controlling the bullets, of course, I have a bool here for enemy that tells it whether it wants to shoot up or down the screen. We have a float for speed, we have a timer, and we again access our score control script. So just like the tank, this one finds the score manager and gets the script. If it's enemy, it shoots down. If it's not, it shoots up. And we have a timer here. Basically, if the bullet is on the screen for 2 seconds or more, it means that it has missed whatever target it's aiming for, and then we destroy it so that it doesn't take up any more memory. And then on its collision events, on trigger entry, if it collides with an enemy, and this only applies if it's not an enemy bullet. And basically, the only way this could ever happen is if it is my bullet. Then it writes to the score control, and it reaches into the alien control object that is on the object that it collides with, because it could basically only collide with an enemy. That's the only object tagged enemy. So we know it has this control script. It gets the value of that alien, and then it sets it to, or it increments our current score by that value. Then it reaches into that value and hits and activates the hit bool and sets it to true, and then it destroys itself. On our collision enter for both the barrier and the bullet, basically, if it collides with a barrier, it reaches into the barrier script and tells it that it has been hit, and then it destroys itself. And if it gets hit with a bullet, it just destroys itself. Because basically, this only happens rarely. If the player's bullet hits the enemy's bullets, they'll both destroy themselves. In the barrier, this is a very simple script that is attached to each individual block that makes up the barrier. It just says, if hit is true, then destroy game object. In the alien object or script, we have floats for the speed as well as the value, and this, along with the shot control, will make it very easy to adjust the value that these units have when they're destroyed, and then a bool to detect whether it's going left or right, and a bool to detect whether or not it's been hit. And this also has objects for the bullet and a transform for the barrel. Then what we do is we get a timer, set it to 0, and we get this, and we create a float called shoot that we then on start set to a random range between 1 and 20. And we're going to increment that every second. And the reason we do that is basically if the timer goes up and it passes whatever random number shoot is, it instantiates a bullet and sets timer 0. That's basically because right now we're not concerned about which enemy shoots bullets, so this just means that they will randomly shoot at the same time. This is just so that you don't get a wave of bullets every couple of seconds. It would be like impossible to dodge. Basically, if it's going left or right, it basically does the same thing. It moves in between a certain threshold, once again 20 and negative 20, and it will move left or right until it reaches that threshold, and then it will move down by 3 units and start moving the other direction. And if it's hit, then it destroys itself. And this collision, I don't think this is working. This was originally meant, it was supposed to destroy the barrier when it went over it, but I don't think that's currently working. Now, the enemy control is the object that manages all the aliens on the screen. So it has game objects for Alien 1 and Alien 2, which move left and right, respectively. It has an object for the score control. It also has objects for the tank and the barrier. And this is an alien object that we're going to swap out these two in between for when we're spawning them. The start X and start Y are where we're going to start spawning the aliens. The max speed is the amount of speed that that the aliens get up to. The bool of dead is whether or not the player is currently dead. We have an array of game objects, which we will use to keep track of all the different enemies on screen. The count, which will tell us how many there are. And left just tells us whether or not we want to set them to left or right. So basically, the first thing it does is it gets the instance of the score control, and then it runs the spawn function, which I'll get to in a moment. So what this basically does is it finds all objects with the enemy tag and puts them in that array. And it goes through all of them and it sets their speed depending on the amount of them that are in that array. See, so all their speeds will equal max speed minus the amount times 4. If there are 0 enemies, it will spawn new enemies. If the player is dead, it restarts the score in score control. And it destroys any enemies that remain on the screen. It then spawns a new set of barriers and instantiates a new tank. In the spawn function, what we do is we get the starting position and we just use some nested for loops to spawn a couple rows of aliens. If we're going left, we put them to moving to the left, otherwise we put them to the right. And then we create a new vector 3 to instantiate them, adding a number of units each time and moving down a number of units each time. And when we spawn the barriers, we just spawn them, use basically the same method to spawn the barriers in place. Score control is the final one. It has text objects for the score and the high score, as well as floats for each of those to determine what the value is, and then has a bool to know when to restart. Basically, it sets the score to whatever the current score float is. If we restart, it checks if the current score is higher than the high score. If so, it replaces them. If not, or like either way, it will set score to 0 and set restart to false. So I believe that is all that we currently have for this project. Thank you.